Hello and welcome to the Psych Tech at Work podcast, the podcast that lives at the intersection of psychology, technology, and the future of work. I am your host, Dr. Charles Handler, and I am excited to be here today with everybody. This is our second episode under the Psych Tech at Work brand. Yes, we were formerly known as Science for Hire for, a good 4 some years. And yes, we did change the name and a little bit of the format. Why? Because times are changing. Things are crazy. And boy, oh boy, technology is having such a broad impact on what goes on in the workplace and how people are feeling and living in the workplace. We got to talk about it. We have to share. We have to learn from one another. And I'm doing my part here, and I hope you are too, listening to this awesome podcast. And today, my guest is none other than JP Elliot, HR and talent executive and host of the Future of HR podcast, one of my very favorite podcasts, and we'll talk about that in a short minute. I'm going to read JP's little bio here because he's done so much I can't memorize it all, and I want to make sure I get all the details. So here we go. JP Elliot is a forward-thinking global human resources executive with extensive experience implementing human capital initiatives that drive business results, improve organizational performance, and elevate company culture. He is a trusted business partner to C-level and senior management teams who can translate business needs into people strategies aligned with the enterprise priorities and P&L targets. Over his career, JP has been fortunate to work across a broad spectrum of industries and organizations, many undergoing significant business and cultural transformations. These experiences have shaped him into a versatile, pragmatic, and global leader who builds strong teams that deliver results. Yes, my friend JP is all that and a bag of chips. And I am so happy to have him on the show today. His podcast is one of the ones that I listen to pretty much regularly. And I will tell you, I have learned so much. It is like your own personal professional development coach listening to this podcast. And the guests are all just total rock stars, psychologists, people in leadership, HR leaders, and it's worth a listen, I'm telling you. Do yourself a favor and listen to his show. So, of course, I'm extremely honored to have him as a guest today. And in today's conversation, we're going to talk about a lot of really great stuff. Of course, we're going to talk about starting and growing a podcast, because why not? It's something that we both do and love. But a lot of our conversation today is just about finding your way, finding your career journey, living that career journey, and being your unique self while you do it. Yes, we talk about it in the context of HR, but I really feel like it's totally broadly applicable to all kinds of stuff. I learned a lot, and I think anyone who hasn't really been an HR leader, which is probably a lot of us, really learned how important it is to be a business person in that context. So how do you represent people in your organization, doing the right things, being a good humanistic, partner to your employees, but also thinking about it like a business. Boy, that can be hard to do both of those things at the same time, I'm sure. Of course, we'll talk a little bit about assessments and JP's experience with that. And, it's always good to hear from the viewpoint of, or see from the viewpoint of the HR leaders we serve with assessments, how they truly feel about it, how they find value in it, etc. So without further ado, welcome to the Psych Tech at Work podcast, JP Elliot.
Hey, Charles, doing well. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no doubt. And I can't wait for you to share a little bit of information with our listeners about podcasting. We've geeked out about that a little bit, on our own. It's a true art form, I feel like, and a real good way to express oneself, but also really help other people learn. Selfishly, I do it so I can learn myself, but also so that I can goof off with with some great guests, And I'm starting out, I'm doing a little tweaks to my format, and one of the things I'd really like to do is just have you share a little nugget about yourself, something that people may not know, something that kind of personalizes you outside of the context of all the professional stuff we're talking about.
Sure, yeah. Well, I think one of the questions you're talking about was what makes you interesting, or what are you doing outside of the grind? And honestly, I would love to say I'm very fascinating. I'm climbing mountains and doing lots of charity work. But really, it's family first. So when I'm not working, it's really trying to spend time with my 13-year-old son, my 10-year-old daughter, and my amazing wife, and our toy golden doodle. So that's my first focus. But I am a big learner and lifelong learner. And so I'm always reading books, always trying to learn something new. And just recently, I completed a master class in generative AI that I took on Maven. And it was really fun because you got to actually use no code tools and try to understand how that works. So that's a little bit about me. I'm always just trying to figure out, like, hey, what's next? What else can I learn? And podcasting is almost an extension of that, to your point of just like tinkering. Hey, we live in 2024. You can build a podcast and people in like Australia can listen to the podcast, or in, who knows where, which is just blows my mind. So that was part of it.
Yeah, definitely. I agree completely. I started doing this in like 2019, and there weren't a lot of tools available for people to just kind of home brew it, and I struggled a little with the tech, but nowadays it's definitely, much easier, which is really cool. And I feel like I've I wish I had more time to read. I swear to God, I love to read, but it seems like I'm constantly moving, and I have a 10-year-old kid and a couple dogs, and just like you, that's my focus. How could it be anything else, really? And so I just don't have as much time. But then I can listen to a podcast and listen to a great guest like Jeffrey Pfeffer. Be able to hear him talk about his own book and summarize the book. So there's a lot of shortcut ways, a lot of cliff notes, if you will. But it is true. I go to the beach and kick back and open a book, and that's always really nice, right? So
Yeah, and what I'm trying to do, because I think we all scroll. We may not admit it, but if you go to your Apple, if you have an Apple phone, and look at your screen time and actually see what you've been scrolling, and instead of scrolling LinkedIn, even though we all love LinkedIn or Twitter or X or whatever, I try to replace that with a book. So every time I start to scroll, if I'm just kind of sitting there for a moment or watching a show that I'm not really into, it's like I just pick up a book that I've got and go back to that on my phone. And so my family's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm actually reading a lot." So I'm trying to do that more and more because I think it's healthier for you, right?
yeah, definitely. So, and my dirty little secret too is I hadn't listened to a lot of podcasts until recently, kind of for the same reason as I can't process other things I'm doing. But I recently got these Meta Ray-Ban glasses that actually you can stream from your phone to them. You can also take pictures and video from them, and they have generative AI built in. So you can say, okay, Meta, how do I get to Smith Street? Or, what's a good restaurant right here? And it'll tell you in your glasses. It's incredible. So now when I'm walking the dogs, I'm just listening to podcasts or listening to Audible or something like that. So
That's
I've made a little
amazing.
bit of shift. Yeah, it's incredible. I'm into the wearable tech for a big time. I've ordered all the devices that are coming out so I can try them and maybe even do some video logging about them. So we're leading in with podcast. Your podcast is the future of HR. It's a fantastic podcast. I've learned a lot from it, and I just how did you come up with the idea? Tell the audience a little about it. And I think I want to give everybody in my audience an assignment, and that assignment is to go listen to at least one episode of JP's podcast because it's outstanding. Tell us a little bit about how you got started with that. And
Well, I appreciate that, Charles. It means a lot. And 'cause I think when you put a podcast together, just like you're doing, you never know who's going to listen. Is it going to hit the mark? Is it going to be valuable? But the idea came up in 2022. I was a little late to the podcast game, maybe like you were. My wife was getting into it. And so we started to listen to podcasts. And I've always wanted to get back. And so as I listened to these podcasts, I started listening to more HR podcasts. And I said, well, they're pretty good, but it doesn't feel like it's really like hitting the mark as it could. And I really wanted to be able to give back. I've had so many great coaches and mentors. And so the idea was I have an amazing network. I've had a great career. I've been very, very fortunate. Like, well, how do I bring these folks on? And like, what if I could listen to some of the biggest experts like Dave Ulrich, Mark Efron, and like have a one-on-one conversation when I was 25 years old? It would have been game changing. And so that was it. And I decided, I'm like, hey, I'm going to do a podcast. I bought a microphone on Amazon. It arrives. My wife's like, what? Why did you buy a microphone? And I said, well, I'm going to start a podcast. And she's like, you don't even know anything about podcasting. I said, I don't know anything about podcasting, but I'm going to learn. And that's why I bought this microphone. And from there, I just went on the journey of figuring out how to get it going. And now I think we had over 100,000 downloads in 2023, and we continue to have a really strong following and just get great guests. And so I'm really, really fortunate that it's hit the mark, but more grateful, Rick, really for all the guests who've come on, who want to share their story and their passion and really supported the podcast.
yeah, I can imagine that. You've had some pretty big name guests on there, which I think is super impressive. And it's good when people that you've heard of and read, or their books, or seen, or in my case as an org psych person, you've had some good folks on, and you actually get personalize it. They're accessible, and you can actually talk to them and learn from them. It's almost like a one-on-one thing. And you had definitely the episode I listened to about sponsorship. I cannot remember the name of your guest, but I would like
Carrie Perrino.
Yeah, it was so
yeah.
good. And I got to thinking, I've worked for myself for 23 years. I've never had a mentor or a sponsor. I really haven't. I'm kind of like, man, I've really missed out on something. Maybe I should go get a job where I can have one and have a sponsor. I guess I'm my own mentor and sponsor. School of Hard Knocks, I guess. So with all those great conversations, this is what I want to know. If you could kind of combine those all in a blender or whatever and say, what have you learned professional wisdom wise? If you had to kind of, maybe that's hard, put it all into one thing. What's your take on these great people and what they've taught you?
I think there's a few things, and it's a tough question. I do get asked this question a lot. I would say number one, from a career standpoint, it's make your own path, right? There is no such thing as a one size fits all career. And when you talk to all these different leaders, you're going to hear that some started internationally, they started outside of HR, they changed jobs a lot, they didn't change jobs. There isn't one real path to success. And so you really got to embrace where you're at and make the best of your opportunities. And every one of the CHROs or thought leaders, frankly, who've been on the podcast, I think have taken those opportunities and built something, a path on their own, which is unbelievable. The second thing I would say, gosh, beyond that, every time you do a podcast, you learn that there's so much more you don't know about a topic, right?
Yeah.
Because you're always learning, and there's just so much to learn about each of these different areas. But I think the second piece would be, when you think about why are people successful in these roles, and a lot of this is about delivering results, right? It's a focus on hard work, delivering results, the basics, to be honest, building good relationships, understanding the business. I think we're always looking for shortcuts, to be honest. I mean, who wouldn't want a shortcut? But there isn't a shortcut. Most people aren't overnight successes. They're actually 20-year overnight successes. And so when you start to hear the journeys and get to know them, you're like, wow, they've had setbacks. They've had these things happen, but they stayed focused on delivering results, building great relationships, and then finding the path that's different for them and differentiating themselves along that way. And I think that's really stuck out for me. I mean, there's a lot of content we learn each time, but from a people perspective, that's what's really kind of, I think, resonated.
That's great. So be yourself. I've been told that by many therapists and other people. Be yourself, and I love that take, and I think it's super true that I'm super into music, so I watch pretty much any documentary about how famous bands or musicians made it to where they are. I mean, they are structured within kind of one vertical or whatever, music and entertainment, but you never know. I want to find out how they got that first big break. How hard did they work to get there, and it's I don't know. I can't stop watching those. I watch as many of them as I can. So let's transition into kind of the unique wisdom about your job and your career that you bring to the table that I'd like to share. So tell us a little bit about kind of your career journey. Give us a good summary of kind of where you've been and maybe where you're looking to go.
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate. My background, this is why I think maybe we kind of connected. I'm an IO psychologist. I spent, kind of the first half of my career, first 5 years in internal, moved external and external consulting and doing human capital and large scale change, transformation, talent type work. Then decided to go back internal in Lenovo, kind of rose up into a VP of talent role there. And so held different VP of talent roles at Dick's Sporting Goods, the Brinks company. Also been really fortunate that I had a mentor and boss who believed in me and asked me to move into an HR partner role. And so I was actually the head SVP of HR for the Brinks company for about 3.5 years. And in that role, we had about 7,000 employees and about $800 million in revenue. So, and then most recently, I was the chief people officer for Williams Marston, it's a private equity-backed company. And so what's interesting about my career, I think I've been very much, maybe more willing than others, to take on what I would call higher risk situations, right? where the stakes are higher, high stakes situation where you're trying to turn around a business, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. So I've done that throughout my career. And yeah, I think it's made me a better leader. But ultimately, my passion and what I love is talent. And I love the idea of really linking the business strategy back to a talent strategy that drives growth and value. And that's kind of where I always look at it from that lens, is always that talent perspective. When I was a generalist, it's hard for me to take the talent kind of hat off. So that's my career in a nutshell. And hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think, one interesting thing is with an IO psychology background, I've found and seen amongst, folks that I know, there's kind of a ceiling in an organization if you're just being an IO psychologist. We learned so much about people and rigor. And, the main thing I feel like I was programmed to do is be skeptical about everything, right? To really look at everything through a lens where you want to get fooled. Sometimes you can over index on that, become kind of a pit bull on it. I work hard on that, but I think those business skills, not to say that people don't have that, but the ability to function in a way that I feel like is able to talk the language of business and step outside of some of the things that we've learned is really, really important. And I think in my career, that's one of the ways I feel like, or I'd like to feel like I've differentiated myself, is when I get into a consultative situation, I'm really good at partnering with the business and looking at things through their lens and not trying to force my own agenda, right? It's not a lab where you have complete control over stuff. Like, you've got to let some stuff go. And I think that's really important. But, to move past that, I mean, what a little bit micro focus more on your transition from what kind of IO roles were you doing more early on? And how did you step from that into the things you were just talking about that are bigger,
Yeah, I mean, we got to go back and, I've been on a podcast, Brando and Joe's podcast. I don't know if you know those guys. They're awesome. And they're two IO psychologists and in grad school who put the podcast together. And it just made me think about, kind of the audience. But, I started 5 years at Taco Bell, which was Yum Brands, in the people development department.
Yep.
Really great place to learn because it's great HR. So I think when you're in a big company, you want to go kind of a bigger company first if you can. Good experience. I had great bosses and mentors there. I didn't really believe I wanted to try consulting, so I went into consulting at IBM Consulting Services. And so there was large scale transformational change. It was org design, a lot of stakeholder management, project management. I think I learned how to do project management there, which is critical. And then I moved back into a smaller boutique human capital firm called Simpson Consulting, which most of the partners now have moved over to a different firm. Really small, but I went there because I was going to learn from some of the best, and the mentorship was amazing. And there we did more around leadership development, talent management strategy, strategic workforce planning, org design, top teaming leadership sessions, etc. That really honed my business experience, I think, and my business acumen, and being more comfortable working with executives. And then I was able to go apply that at Lenovo in a talent and leadership development role. And then the scale and scope was there. But, the consulting was already in your background. So how do you diagnose? How do you assess?
Yeah.
How do you understand? How do you build a plan and solution and implement it? And so, I think, again, there's no perfect career path. But going external, having some of that consulting experience can be really valuable because you sort of learn, like, how consultants think. But then going internal, because if you stay a consultant too long, you'll never go internal, because you won't be ready for the bureaucracy and all that, right? So you kind of have to have a balance. It's very hard to go kind of back and forth, but it's a great experience both ways. And so that's kind of where I cut my teeth, and I would say from an IO psych perspective, I think there's some that are much more, quantitative and statistics based, versus qualitative and maybe more, I would say it's more art and science. Yeah, I'm a little more in the creative space. More, I believe in the science piece. I love quant. I love quantitative. Or bring data into it. But my skill set where I think I excel is more being innovative and building out new solutions that the organization hadn't seen before, or bringing in the latest things that are happening across our field, whether it's organization network analysis, et cetera, and trying to bring that into the fold. And like, how do we use this new tech or process? Now it's AI, of course, everything's AI, but how do you bring that in and do it in the right way?
Yeah, very cool. So you've had really, like, one foot in each world in some sense, right? And so I'd like to help listeners who haven't had, and me myself as well, as much, interaction with chief people officers, folks that have, are really in charge, running the show to some extent. So what what's that like from your perspective of, someone who is coming from the outside or as a consultant or someone who is maybe earlier in their career, interacting with the chief people officer? Not that it's like turns you into some kind of unapproachable person. I'm certainly no, you're not like that. But in general, what's the lens you should be thinking about, right? Because context is everything, and it's so important to put yourself in other people's shoes and think about the situation from their perspective going in. At least that's how I like to do it. So how would you prep someone or prime someone for that kind of interaction? I guess situations matter, so there's probably a lot of different ones that dictate that. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's a good place to start is like talking about the role of a chief people officer and really what they're really trying to deliver. Because I think you're right. Having empathy for what that senior executive position really entails is important to being, I think, more effective as a partner with them. The first, I think that every great HR leader and chief people officer believes that HR exists to ensure the organization has the talent and capabilities to win. So, we're focused on winning in the marketplace. And then I'd say they're business people first. They just happen to be executives that deliver value through human capital or people strategies and tactics. You're not, I think a lot of times, I'll be interviewed, someone might interview me and hey, what questions do you have? And it's very rare, and I've heard other chief people officers who said this, it's very rare that someone asks a question about the business, right? They'll ask questions around culture, soft things. And I've even had people say, well, what's onboarding like here? And I'm like, who cares? Like, why are you asking me that is the worst question I've ever been asked.
yeah,
That's not going to help you figure out the job. Like, you just don't know what to ask an HR person. But that just shows you how they think about it. The reality is really great HR people are really good business people. And especially when you get up into a Fortune 500, Fortune 100 company, these are incredible, incredible executives who just happen to do HR. So that's the first piece. Second, great HR leaders are really the social architect of the top team. They understand how to bring that team together. They're working with the CEO, the CFO, and the rest of that leadership team to make sure things are working well, that there's a clear line business strategy, the team's high performing. It is not an easy task at that level.
no,
But all good HR leaders also are going to say, hey, whatever the organization's list of priorities is, like, and how we win, that becomes their list. So some people would say, well, what's an HR strategy? Your HR strategy is your business strategy, just translated to the people piece. So if the business strategy is to grow a certain market by 5%, that's what HR's business plan should be. That's the same goal. It's just now a level down of like, okay, what roles do we need? What kind of capabilities do we have to get to that 5%, right? So it's much more a business focused kind of role if they're going to be doing something, if they're a great chief people officer. The other thing to think through is like, well, how do they grow up? Most chief people officers, and it's changing, will have come from a couple different areas in the function, but they're going to have like a T-shaped career. So they're going to have depth in compensation and rewards. They're going to have depth as a generalist. They're going to have depth as a talent person. And then at some point they rose up and they start to become a generalist and kind of go across the T. And so great CHROs have at least one depth or discipline that they're great in, and they've learned to be generalists across the board on the others. And so that's why it takes a while to become a chief people officer. You have to have that depth because you got to lead that team. They have to respect you. You have to understand how things work. Like, you don't have to understand everything about benefits, but hopefully you've been through at least one or two cycles of benefit implementations and know the questions to ask, right? And so that's really critical. Chief people officers also, they don't just manage their own team and the executive team. They work a lot with the board of directors, especially in a public company. So a lot of their time is managing the board of directors, executive compensation, succession planning. So, when you actually look at their studies, CHROs are not spending as much time with their team as possible. They're spending much more of their time with their peers, maybe the board, sometimes even externally, depending on what's going on. And frankly, more and more CHROs are being asked to lead the organization's response to social issues, right? Or political issues, or whatever issues. They're really always typically social issues, but it's very challenging. So how do we need to respond? Should we respond? So my point of all this, CHROs, especially since the pandemic, have been asked to take on more and more and do more and more with sometimes less and less. So it's a really, really difficult job. So they've got a short attention span. If you're going to reach out to them, your original question, how do you work with them? is that don't sell, but actually help them solve their business problems, right? So, I think the wrong approach is kind of hopefully thinking that they have hours and hours to spend with you. They don't, right? They're going to make decisions pretty quickly because they're toggling so many different things in a day. And so they're kind of the king and queen of multitasking. So as you're coming in there and trying to solve their problems, it's more about making sure they're aware of what you could do. How could you possibly help them when that need arrives? And I always use this analogy of a divorce lawyer. You could be the world's best divorce lawyer. I'm not calling you, I love my wife. I have no need for a divorce lawyer. Okay. And I think it's kind of the same way when you're selling to, or being a consultant. You can't call them and say, hey, I've got this solution and keep banging down the door. Doesn't make any sense. It's more like, hey, look, we've got this. This is what we're great at. If you ever need us, let's talk. That's the way to approach it, and be just data driven and financially oriented, and so coming to a CHRO and saying, let's do training for training's sake, probably is going to fail, right? If it's not tied to a business leader. So those are just a few perspectives I have on how you might do this.
That's really good. Really good. Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit of a junior version of that, but I've consulted as, some giant companies, a lot of giant companies that typically I'm at enterprise level, but I always study before I go into even the first conversation. If there's some interest from somebody, I spend time studying the company. I look at like, what are their initiatives? Where are they in the market? How are they treating their people? And then one of the things that I have always done is, there's lingo, right? Oh, we have our top hat program. I'm just making something up, and maybe it's an anachronism or something, and you can read about that on the company website or whatever. I usually refer to that. I'll make references to the specific things that company's doing when I'm talking to them. I always feel like that helps me feel a little more connected. And they're like, oh, this guy gets us. And it's not just BS. I mean, I am actually interpreting that. So one of the things I think is interesting, and I can't remember which podcast episode it was of yours I was listening to, one of the guests, I believe, you're talking about how HR is a little different because a lot of times the outcomes from people and having good people aren't directly measurable, right? If you change your supply chain to shave 5% off of your problems with efficiency or what have you, those are measurable. The bean counters can pretty much put those into some perspective. Not to say that people things aren't, but I think there's some distance sometimes, right? So how would you say that? Is that accurate? And what can someone do in HR to be able to quantitatively prove value?
Yeah, I mean it's accurate, but I think I put a caveat on it, right? So it's
Okay.
harder to measure the impact of people or human capital initiatives, but we should always be trying to do that.
Oh,
And
of
so
course.
of course, right, and my advice is twofold because sometimes it's not an A to B relationship and maybe it is a little bit more further downstream. But you really have, when you're doing any kind of initiative, you've got to be thinking it through from this perspective. One, is this going to help us drive revenue? Two, is this going to improve productivity or efficiency? Right. And if it's not doing one of those three things, should
Yeah.
you even work on it? Right. Even and you should just get the executive team to believe, hey, I think we're going to invest in this training, this high potential program, et cetera. Do we think it's going to do one of these three things? I don't need the exact numbers, but everyone says, yeah, I think this makes sense. Okay. So that's important. Second, getting just success defined up front and saying, look, these are the three metrics we think we can measure. Here's how we think we can do it. And aligning up front is important. What happens a lot of times in HR is we've already done the initiative and now we're trying to basically justify our existence by trying to find the
Right.
data. So that's a big mistake. And then third, Charles, I'll just say this, because I've been asked to do trainings that have nothing to do with the business, that aren't going to move the needle. And I'll just say to leaders, look, hey, I know you love grit. You wrote the book. It's a great book. You want us to now do grit training for leaders. Hey, we'll do it. But I just want to tell you, it's not going to change the revenue. It's not going to improve productivity. And maybe they'll take some things home. Maybe they'll be a little better leader, but I can't quantify it. And I'm not going to spend my
Yeah.
time quantifying it because I've got bigger things to fry. And as long as they understand that, then it's all good, right? But every organization is different in how they think about that investment.
Hmm.
And that's what makes it challenging for HR because some organizations are like, hey, we don't care. We believe in training. We believe in investment. We believe in all these different things. Go, go, go. Other organizations are saying, please give me your ROI head up front. Before you even do this, I want to make sure it's really going to deliver or you don't even get past go and collect $200.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and in my world of selection too, you can quantify things if you do some validation work, and I've done that successfully, and that's really good. But it's sometimes hard to get the data. I think that's one of the things that I've been frustrated with over the years is we don't have that, or we don't have the time to give you that. So I'm like, oh, help me help you. I can't prove myself.
Well, selection's great. So selection's great because you can do selection. There's so many places that you can actually measure it. So it's great when
Yeah,
you can. And you
yeah.
should 100% lean into that.
Yeah, yeah. We'll talk about assessments here in a second, which are a big piece of that. So one thing that I picked up on, it wasn't, you weren't saying it because I don't think you would believe this or buy into it, but you often hear so much the knock of, well, HR is just never innovative. You mentioned earlier you've done innovative things. Oh, HR is kind of the administrative. We'll put them in the dungeon or whatever. I think that's changing a lot as we start to use the word people, and as things, I think the pandemic did a lot of it, but it's still part of a trend that's happening. Is we got to treat people like people. You're not cogs in a machine. You're not robots. That's the golden rule. I mean, that's the right way to do things. And so I feel like we are evolving. I mean, you're closer to that than me, but what do you say when someone says, well, HR is not innovative, they're just procedural, nothing ever changes, they're not doing anything to make a difference? I don't think you believe that, but you can you can tell me how you've proved that wrong personally in your career.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people think that HR, has the final say in everything we do. And the reality is we are still a support function. And we've come a long way. We definitely have more of a seat at the table. We have more impact. We've got amazing, amazing HR leaders across the field. And I think the pandemic, we have had a lot more gravitas and credibility. But at the end of the day, we still have to report to our business leaders and CEOs who will give us the final approval on some of this or not. So if someone says to me, HR is not being innovative and not delivering enough, I don't think it's always HR's fault because my guess most HR people want to be innovative. I'd look to the leaders and say, hey, why aren't you then giving us the funding to do this? Why aren't you helping us support this? Why aren't you bringing us into that meeting earlier? Why aren't we in the first meeting when we were talking about this problem, not when you've already made the decision? Now you want me to go execute. And so I think you've got to kind of move upstream a little bit because what I have found is almost every HR leader wants to do innovative, cool work, and that's going to have impact. And news is not a proxy for better, but we want to have that impact. But we can be sometimes slowed down by the business that doesn't want us to. The other thing is it depends on who's saying this, right? Not everyone's going to see the impact of HR, and that's okay because we are behind the scenes. It's a little bit invisible, and so for some employees and team members, they're like, well, we don't know what you do, we don't see it. Now, hopefully, the organization is making that more and more visible, but understandably, that you're not going to always understand that we're running succession plans or development programs or assessments, right? They don't always see the cool work that HR is doing. They just expect that, oh, well, you're just getting a paycheck and it's smiles and files and all that. And so that's a little bit of a naive view, but it's an understandable view if we're not really out there
Yeah.
front and center and helping drive it.
Yeah. And maybe people have had to deal with administrative procedural junk they don't like that comes out of HR in their career, right? So the police or whatever. And that administrative part's not going away. I mean, that's definitely a piece of it, but it's not the strategic part. And I would also say, what popped into my head when you were talking is, we have the technology, right? I think that was from like the $6 Million Man show. We can rebuild them. We have the technology, but HR technology is a huge shot in the arm. I mean, it is across every function, right? But I think back, I'll personalize this a little bit. It's not really, I think early in my career, my first internship at Sprint Corporation. It's like the only time I've been internal in a giant company. Well, part of my job, first of all, was to test things off the fax machine, put a little plastic scoring overlay, score it, put it in a spreadsheet, and email it. That was amazing. You can email this to people, and so that was a not a good use of what I think is a really good brain. But also, I remember at that time being really interested in 360-degree feedback and wanting to get involved in that. And the door was kind of like, I'd read some research about it. It made so much sense. And there was no technology to do it. It was so unwieldy at a big company to really do an effective 360 that it just wasn't accessible to us. So, I mean, those are kind of smaller examples, but now we have technology to do so much more than a 360. I mean, the the type of stuff you can get with semantics, feedback, looking at people's email traffic and stuff in a way that has integrity, of course. We just have technology now that I think can help us so much and help our employees. Just the wellness program stuff where you can give people access to, the opportunity to track what they're doing and improve their lives personally, even outside of work.
Yeah, no, I think the technology has come a long way. It's still, though, I think we've got to be really clear about what the purpose is. So what business problem are we solving as we all lay this in? Because now, I mean, gosh, in AI, I mean, there's an AI tool for everything, and so the problem is you start to have just fragmentation of your HR tech stack.
Yep.
And everyone's got a new tool. And what it's doing is actually adding a lot of complexity to the employee experience versus saying, okay, wait, what actually adds value? And so I do think the future will actually be the best companies will be stripping away tech in some ways and figuring out where it makes the most sense versus just adding on. Or there'll be more consolidation probably, and it'll be, but who knows? We go consolidate, and then we obviously have to defragment and take it apart again because it doesn't actually solve the problems, and the cycle continues of HR tech. So I don't know, but I think it's an amazing time we're living in, and there's just a plethora of data, and we have an opportunity to make just more impact than we ever have from an HR people and really on people's experience at work. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and you're right about from a hiring standpoint, I look at hiring workflows and tech stacks and everything all the time, and it's never put together all at once, right? So you're constantly like, oh, we got to change the ATS to do this, and then we got to change the candidate experience thing, and they're never in sync. So I completely get what you're talking about. I think that we have moved a little bit more to a platformization where you can subscribe to one master platform that has a lot of modules, but even then adopting those and moving things in and out, it's not easy at all. But I have a romance with tech, and and I haven't had as much applied experience, so that's a really good viewpoint. And so let's kind of transition into the last little bit, and I think something that I value your insights on a lot and love to hear your experience around assessments, because that's pretty much what I've spent most of my career in. And one of the things is I'd like to think that most people who've had your experience and are in those positions see the value in assessments and would like to utilize them. But I don't know if that's always true. So tell us a little bit about your experience over the years with assessments.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, having the background I have and the exposure and seeing the impact assessments can have, assessments play a very important role in selection and development, no doubt, right? So it's a really important role. And I've implemented them in almost every role that I've ever been in some form or fashion. So I think, we get it right, though, Charles. The way to get this right, I think you've got to be really thoughtful. It's got to be science-based, and you've got to leverage the assessments to gather data to make better decisions, right? And I think you typically need to have a really experienced internal talent leader or a very reputable assessment partner who can guide you there. And I say that because there's a lot of bright, shiny objects. There's a lot of flashy presentations and vendors. There's a lot of people who do assessments for assessment's sake. Take action on the assessments. God forbid they're actually unethical or, have adverse impact or discrimination kind of things, especially in the selection front.
Yep.
But you've got to be careful that way. And more importantly, especially for developmental assessments or even for a selection into a hire, it's a credibility issue for the HR function if the assessments aren't being used properly. So whether you're doing a 360, you're doing a Hogan, you're doing a critical intelligence or thinking inventory like a Watson Glaser or Ravens, how do you leverage that data, right? How do you make sure it's being done the right way? I think that's part of the art of it. It's like the science is one piece, and then the art is how do you make it all come together. So, but definitely big on assessments. Everyone's got their favorites a little bit, and I'm excited to see where that continues to go because I think it's going to continue to be a area. There's more innovation coming.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it's a checkerboard. I would like to think that the leader who is saying this is a good thing for us is really able to make an impact with it. And sometimes it's, like you said, it's kind of tacked on, or there's just not a lot of pre-work done to understand like who a good vendor even is. Again, that's been a big piece of my career is kind of a river guide to folks that don't have an internal IO and say, we need one, but we don't exactly know what one to look at. A lot of times I'll get a list like, oh, we've been looking at these companies, and I'll look at the list and go, none of these companies are, maybe they're good companies, but you're putting a square peg in a round hole, so it's good to have expertise. And I've seen more and more IO psychologists in big corporations now. I mean, I start looking at household names and seeing people in my travels like, oh, they have an IO psychologist now, and I did a session at PsyOp because I'm also a giant fan of big tech. So I got IO psychologists from big tech companies on a panel to talk about what it's like. And some of these places have 50 IO psychologists. I think Amazon has 100, right? So these are companies that are doing things right, and they have a lot of IO psychologists, right? And they all have selection programs. So I think that part is really good. From your lens, though, I mean, what have you seen something go horribly wrong with assessments, like seen a problem that you could coach people to avoid? Or maybe it's the opposite, something that's been highly successful in what was done correctly in that situation. You choose whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen anything go that's like horribly wrong. I think hopefully because we made some good decisions up front.
Yeah, I didn't mean on your watch,
I think,
by the way.
no, I know, no. Well, I think there's plenty of examples, and I do think, that there's a real concern and risk of making sure that, especially in the selection front going forward, that these tools that have AI built into them, and are really actually doing what they think it should be doing, and testing that out. I think there's some definite risk there on that front, because I don't really know if every vendor understands everything that's happening under the hood, and how they're sort of vetting out candidates. But so I think watch that space. I think something will pop on that. There'll be something bad that happens there. Someone will get sued.
Yeah.
But when you do assessments right, especially for development, I mean, I think the idea is it's a life cycle. So, whether you're doing whether you're doing assessments from a selection standpoint, hopefully that is data that you can leverage on the onboarding and then further down that road and that person's development. It happens more at the executive director, kind of level, that maybe there's some kind of insight there because you really don't have the time and energy. So I've seen that really work really well, where you understand, and we made a great selection hire. This is who you are. This is how you need to think about your onboarding. People understand that. And I've seen organizations really embrace that and do that well. I think that's always awesome when you see that. It's also great to use assessments for that development process and people feeling like, hey, I've gotten to know myself better. This was a pivotal moment to be in this development program. The 360, the Hogan, all that helped me understand how I could be a better leader. That's when the assessment's really going right.
Yeah.
And I think you have bigger impact because those individuals, those leaders will have impact in the organization.
Yeah. And one thing, and I think that this goes with selection and development, is if you're not using assessment as a support tool, I mean, if you're over relying on it to just say, oh, the assessment said this and we're just going to automatically do this, that's bad. And in development, right, the assessment is just one piece of a picture where you have a coach, or you have a performance management program. There's support things around you. And all the assessment does is give you and your counterparts that are working with you, your partners, a signal that you can all hopefully agree on, or if you disagree, you can talk over why you disagree. But it's a conversation starter and a way to kind of have some believable objective metrics. And it's the same thing in the hiring program as well. But I feel like in hiring, unfortunately, you don't get a lot of feedback on any assessments you take. Either you get the job and you figure I did pretty well, or you don't get the job and you figure you did crappy on it. That's basically it. So
that's true. Yeah. And I think, from a selection standpoint, and your audience would know this, I personally, this number, it's not really rooted in actual science, but I would say it's a 10 to 15% of a hiring decision, especially at an executive level. I'm going to look at the Hogan, or other assessments, and kind of that's going to help me. Now there's more in-depth reports you can do that do more depth leadership assessment, executive assessment, and maybe you get that a little bit more weighting, right? But in that mind, it's more of a kick out, right? It's almost like, hey, there's a certain score you've got to get, like an hourly hiring, for us to make sure that we move you forward to have the interview. But you can't over rotate. Like if someone actually has invented a assessment that could predict who's going to be successful, like a 90% of the time, we'd all be using it and we'd all be out of jobs. And the
Yeah.
reality is it just doesn't work that way. So
Yeah.
it's just you have to use some judgment with assessments.
Oh yeah. I hoist a giant red flag and I tell my clients, if you have any vendor that tells you they're 90% accurate, oh, even more, like, we're heroes if we're 20% accurate, to be honest. I mean, if you think about predicting the variance in a human's performance, and even the best person might have an off day, the context, they may leave the job because for reasons not related to their performance. I mean, there's so many variables. Trying to figure out a snowflake complex people with a piece of paper or an online survey, that's just not tenable. It's a support tool. It's some extra signal. If you do a good job collecting evidence across a process, then it's a piece of evidence to help you build that big picture, you know. And I think that's a philosophy that I think you've got to embrace as you use these tools, like you said, not over rotating on them, for sure. Well, awesome. And I'm always glad to, I haven't really interacted a lot with folks that are, you know, running people operations and HR like that. I typically come in more at like a VP level. So I'm glad to have heard what you said today, because I'm sure I'll have those opportunities, you know, and I want to make sure that I do my very best. And just as a mindset, though, I would say to any of our listeners, the mindset of being in a practical business results oriented mindset when you go into an organization to work with them, feeling their pain, helping them achieve their victories. That's what it's all about. I always say my job as a consultant is to make my boss look good, to make to their bosses, right? The person that hires me, they need to look good to their bosses for real reasons. And that's my objective, you know?
Well said, Charles. Well said.
Cool. Well, cool. We're up on time here. I want to thank you so much. It's been a really good conversation, very different perspective than I often have on here. And that's, again, as we talked about earlier, part of the goal, right? Expose yourself to a lot of different viewpoints and types of experience, because it all weaves together, you know?
Well, thanks for what you're doing, Charles. I think it's a great podcast and super helpful for the industry and HR leaders.
Yeah. And I would just say, again, your assignment as my listeners, pick an episode of Future of HR and listen to this great guy be able to really pull some wisdom out of his guests. I don't know. I look at it as a serious developmental experience for me. So
thanks, Charles. This is a blast. So much fun to be on the podcast.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. I want to encourage all the listeners out there to share this podcast with their friends, families, colleagues. You know, people don't find podcasts just randomly typically. They do so at the recommendations of others that they trust, and, you know, people who've really enjoyed that content and want to share. And I certainly sincerely hope you've enjoyed the content of this episode and the others like it, and encourage you to please share with your friends, family, and coworkers. Let them know about this podcast and what we have to offer. They're going to definitely walk away smarter, sharper, and thinking about some really interesting issues, which is what we all want, right? Thank you very much. Until next time.